I mean, for Killzone, how did you? I mean, I love the score because it has a. I mean, it has an electronic element, but also has a huge orchestral element. I mean, how did you decide that was the sound to go with, and not the settle on a generic, very synth-based score that most video games have?
Yeah. Um, it was kind of just finding my feet really, because I knew that I wanted to do something that was orchestral, but at the same time had enough beefiness to it that it could kind of compete with all the visual onslaught that was going on.
Right.
With all the guns going off, and also on screen there's so much stuff happening, and so
Mm-hmm.
I knew that the music needed to compete with that, and I also knew that a straight orchestral score was probably not going to be quite powerful enough to compete with that. So next to that, because it's sci-fi as well, I felt that it needed some electronica influences and some
Right.
harder edged sounds. So for the in-game, it's very much a 50-50 mix between the two, where on some occasions the orchestral stuff will take over a bit more, and then on other occasions it will be almost purely electronic. And also budget-wise, there wasn't a budget to do a full orchestral score for the entirety of the game. So we
Mm-hmm.
very much decided, okay, all the in-game music is going to be done with MIDI and samples, and then all the cutscenes and the main menu music is going to be done with a live orchestra,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a, as you know, is that there's an emotionality that happens when you have live players in a room playing a theme. It could be a very simple four-note motif, but there's no way with samples I'm going to get anywhere near the kind of sound that you get when you just get a whole bunch of people playing together in a room.
Right.
It's. I mean, samples and technology is getting better and better, but to really get that emotional stuff in there, I still feel that it's very difficult to achieve with just MIDI and samples.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of the decision we made: to keep the orchestra for the cutscenes, and keep the MIDI and samples for the interactive in-game music.
So how did between I guess Killzone 2 and Killzone 3, how did this third one differ from the second one?
Well, in a couple of ways. I think the main thing is I kind of knew a little bit more about what I was doing as well.
Right.
It was, it's been a huge learning curve for me as well, because when I did the first Killzone, it was actually my first orchestral score as well. I'd never written for a full symphony orchestra before, so a big challenge of that was just doing that in the first place. And so when I listen back to it now, I can hear that the Helga's March is a piece that works well on its own, and there's some elements in the score, there's some themes that I established that work, but it's quite schizophrenic. There's so much stuff going on, and there's
Right.
that thing that happens as well, that someone gives you the opportunity to record with a live orchestra, and you kind of go, oh, that's great, we just got to put it on everything, without really thinking about, well, how am I serving the narrative? And so on Killzone 1, that was for me, that was the learning element to it, was realizing, okay, the fact that I have an orchestra doesn't mean it needs to go on everything. And so on the second one, I felt that I knew a bit more what I was doing, and also musically I was a bit more clear about what I wanted to say, and how I wanted to support the scenes, and I wanted to be clearer with my themes, and work more on a leitmotif basis, so that characters or situations had a very particular theme to them that would come back and would
Mm-hmm.
hopefully be recognized by the player and by the listener. And with the third one, it was a continuation of that, but also the third game is much darker in tone, because the second game you're kind of on the offense. You're basically, the game was trying to basically mirror politics at the time, and so
Right.
what you're doing in the game is a preemptive strike on Helgon. You're basically saying these guys are getting too dangerous, so we need to attack them now before we allow them to get any bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens at the end of the game is that you realize that that hasn't worked at all, and they actually held a big part of their forces back, and you end up kind of getting obliterated at the end of the game. And so the third game is you're now actually on the defense, and you're trying to get away from a very hostile planet with very hostile enemies. Your forces are completely decimated, so you're just this band of rebels trying to get off the planet, and things are not going well at all. And so the music needed to have a very kind of big tonality shift towards something that was much more dark and much more despairing than the previous one, which is all about big bold statements of let's kick some ass and chew bubblegum.
Yeah.
And so that was a very big shift, I think.
And when you write, what's more important to you? Is it plot or character?
Wow, that's a good question. I think probably plot, because I'm just trying to think. It's actually a really interesting question because I haven't thought about it that way. Because for me, the two kind of are interlinked really. But when I look at a scene that I'm trying to underscore, I'm trying to find the things that aren't being said or that aren't necessarily obvious.
Right.
That's not necessarily always a character. It could also be a situation or a conversation between characters.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm looking for is to communicate what isn't being conveyed in the scene or what you wouldn't necessarily get from the scene. So in Killzone,
like every good score, good score, I think every good score should do that.
Yeah, it's. I guess there are many trains of thoughts on it really, because on the other hand, I just said that I like leitmotifs as well, and leitmotifs are usually very much character driven, although I guess they can be scene driven as well, or plot driven. But taking a scene from Killzone 3, which is a kind of a standoff between the two major protagonists from the Helghast side, because what happens in the story is Emperor Visari, who was the main protagonist in Killzone 2, gets killed by one of your teammates at the end of the game. And so in Killzone 3, it's basically these two new factions have come up and are warring for who's going to be in control of Helghan. And so they're kind of constantly having these little skirmishes and little. It starts off all verbally, and then later on it becomes physical as well. But initially, they're just trying to test the waters with each other, see where they are, and do a lot of talking and a lot of vocal fencing. And so the one character is a very he's called Stahl, and he's an industrialist, and he's basically got control of all the weapons. And then you've got Orlok, who's the other guy, who's a general, and he's very much from the military side. He just it's very much about attack and action, and Stahl's much more a scheming character, and he's scheming with Orlok as well. So there was a scene there where they're basically talking in front of a council, and you can tell that Stahl is got other plans and is trying to manipulate the situation a little bit. And so the music was very much about driving that point home, and because when two people are talking musically, there isn't necessarily that much you can do apart from trying to convey the hidden meaning. And in that scene, it was very much about showing and letting the audience hear, well, this guy is not he's not who he seems. He's saying he's got the best ideas for what everybody needs, but actually he's all in it for himself, and that was basically what the music is trying to do. So in that sense, I think, to answer your question, I think it's very much a plot driven approach, I guess.
Okay. I mean, for you as a composer listening to your music, I love your sound. You have a very unique voice, and some of the stuff for Killzone 2, I haven't heard much for Killzone 3, just from the demo. But I would love to hear your music behind feature films. Is that like a direction that you'd want to move into?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think I'd ever want to leave the games industry behind, just because I really like working with games and I like the technical aspect of it as well. But there is something about writing for a scene that is linear, which is always the exciting thing about working on cutscenes, and developing a theme that is going to come back exactly the way you intended to. When you're writing in-game music, the game dictates how that music is going to be played back, so you have some control, but it doesn't always come out in necessarily the best way for someone to listen to. But when it's in a film, and the way it can complement a film and the story is something that really, really excites me. And so, no, I'd love to do film, and if the opportunity would arise, I would definitely grasp it with both hands.
And I always like to ask composers this question. If you had the chance to rescore any film ever made, with no disrespect to the original composer, which film would you pick?
Oh, sorry, you're just dropping out a little bit again.
Oh, sorry.
Are you still there?
If you had the chance to score any film ever made, with no disrespect to the original composer, which film would you pick?
Wow, that's a good question. Well, funnily enough, I think it would be, I wouldn't mind, it would be a very difficult film, but Witness with Harrison Ford.
Right.
I don't know if you remember that film.
I love the film.
So you're dropping out a little bit.
Sorry. No, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Witness. No, I love the film. It's a great film.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny. It's a score that I've learned to appreciate over time. When I initially heard it, because it's a synth score basically by Maurice Jarre, I didn't like it because I saw the film years and years after it actually came out, and that's always the trouble with some of the synth scores from like the 80s. Some of them don't really hold up that well. Yeah, there's only a few synth scores that I can remember, like Blade Runner, for example, which I think holds up incredibly well, just because it's so iconic of that time. Right. But Witness, there was a scene which I remember very distinctly, and the musical piece on the album is called "Building the Barn," where Harrison Ford, together with the Amish people, they're building barns, and it's just a very kind of quite a happy scene about them constructing a barn and constructing a house and how everybody's working together. And the theme is actually pretty good, but it's just the way it's done with the synthesizers, it didn't work for me. And I thought, wow, would it be amazing to have a nice orchestral arrangement there? Because to me it seems that these Amish people who are seemingly wanting to live very simply and very close to nature, it almost would need acoustic instruments in my mind as opposed to a synth score. I thought it was for the subject of the movie. I actually thought it was quite a strange choice. So that's something I'd definitely be interested in trying again. It might be a bit obvious to go for an orchestral arrangement, but I think it would work quite well.
That's a good choice. I like that choice. So I remember back when Killzone 2 came out, I didn't think there was going to be a score release, but then a few months later it finally got released. Are there plans for a Killzone 3 release?
There will be, yeah. It's a shame with Killzone 2 that it took such a long time to emerge, because I think it's always important to try and capitalize on the fact that when the game's hot, to get the score out there so that more people are hopefully exposed to it. I know that with Killzone 3, it is coming out on the PSN store, so at least it's directly available for people who are on the PlayStation. And I'm still trying to find out whether it's also going to get an iTunes release and even hopefully a physical release. There have been talks about that, but it's the thing that as a games composer that sometimes you don't have much control over. When the company owns the soundtrack, then you can suggest things, but it's ultimately up to them how they choose to release it. So I really hope they do, but I know that there are plans to do so. So I hope those plans come to fruition.
I'm definitely looking forward to it. Looking forward to the game too. I have it, pre-ordered, ready to go. So.